In this talk, we're going to try to give you a brief understanding of how we can transition away from both gasoline and diesel fuel. That is, transition away from the use of oil. And as you can see in the title, the suggestion is, and the path is, to move towards alcohols, and in particular to use methanol, which can be made from our abundant natural gas. Okay, slide 2 suggests that there's an easy path to make this transition away from oil. And that path has been researched by our own EPA, by universities such as the MIT Engineering Lab, and by car companies such as Lotus Engineering, and our own Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. The path utilizes the availability of current flex fuel vehicles. There are over 11 million of these on the road, and many counties, such as Los Alamos County, only purchase flexible fuel vehicles. However, those vehicles can only run on ethanol, which is often called grain alcohol, and gasoline. What we're going to want to suggest is that we make them, warranty them, so that they can run on methanol, ethanol, or gasoline. And the reason for that is that methanol can be made much more cheaply than ethanol, and it can be made from our abundant natural gas or our abundant natural wastes, organic wastes. The first thing we have to cover and get it sort of out of the way is, why aren't we using this natural gas directly? Why don't we directly use compressed natural gas, CNG, or another form of it called liquefied natural gas, LNG? There are very basic reasons. Although this on paper seems to be a very good idea, there's an enormously high cost of vehicle conversion, because you have to keep the compressed natural gas at a high enough pressure to get enough molecules of energy in your car to give you some reasonable range. That's actually true for liquefied natural gas. In that case, you don't store it under pressure, but you store it at a very cold temperature. And you have to worry about the fact that you cannot keep it at that temperature for any reasonable length of time. You can't keep it in your garage for a day while you go away without losing some of that gas as it boils off. There's a high cost of the pumping stations necessary to either compress the natural gas to the 3600 psi that is normally used in vehicles, or to liquefy the natural gas, and in that case it's usually liquefied at some central processing facility and then carried in special trucks and stored at the dispensers in special containers to keep the temperature, really keep it very cold so it stays liquefied. These are very expensive procedures. There's a high cost of maintenance. Anything under high pressure or very low temperature will require servicing on a regular basis that we are not used to with liquid-fueled cars, gasoline-fueled cars. Lower efficiency, the power of the vehicles is going to be less because there's less actual energy in these fuels, and they therefore will give you lower range, but also they're not burning. They're not going to be able to burn as completely as the fuels we're going to suggest, because the engines cannot be optimized for their usage. So when you put all these things together, you see there's no easy transition path. And because of that, if you make the transition to CNG, you're really locked into that technology. Or LNG, you're once again locked into that technology. And this is a time of very rapidly developing fuels technology, where we're gaining knowledge on how to make cellulosic ethanol, not just ethanol from sugars in corn. Also, we're learning how to make butanol, and we know already how to make methanol and make it quite cheaply. This slide from Lotus Engineering gives us a complete picture of how we can mix the three liquid fuels, gasoline, ethanol, and methanol, and basically have no change in the vehicle's drivability. The green area is ethanol, and along the abscissa, along the x-axis, the scale goes from 0 to 85 because we now have vehicles that can run up to 85% ethanol. If you do go all the way to the right-hand side of that graph, you see that at 85, the portion above the ethanol, the gray portion, is gasoline. That's the 15% of gasoline that's in the mixture. But anywhere along the x-axis, you can add methanol to that mixture of gasoline and ethanol, and that blue wedge, as it widens as we go to the left, indicates the amount of methanol that can actually be used together with gasoline and ethanol to give us an E85 vehicle that runs exactly the same as if we had no methanol in there at all. And Lotus actually recommends that a mixture of 40% gasoline, 10% ethanol, and 50% methanol would be a really good mixture. And of course, if we are using 50% methanol, we have to, we completely understand that half of the fuel we're using now is made from natural gas or wastes. And this is an enormous change. This would be an enormous change in terms of our consumption of oil in this country. This is something to really strive for. Well, let's have a little bit harder look at methanol. We want to understand why we would even consider it. The first and probably most important reason is that methanol can be made from natural gas. In the last 5 or so years, we have learned how to get natural gas out of the ground that was essentially inaccessible before. And every year since then, we have learned how to get it out more cheaply and with less trouble, with less problems. We can easily foresee a very long-term supply of natural gas, maybe 100, 120 years, and that number might actually grow as we learn how to get even more of it out of the ground. The techniques for doing that, I'm not going to go into in this report, in this slide presentation, but basically they are relatively new techniques, and we are really learning how to do them intelligently and safely under state and federal regulation. If we use methanol from natural gas, we are not competing with food. Ethanol, of course, the way we make it in the United States, is largely made from corn. Corn prices have gone up, the prices of steak and the animals that use corn have gone up, and of course even the ethanol itself is expensive to make. Distillation is simply an expensive process, and ethanol must be made by distilling corn. Now, there are other issues with ethanol, and the biggest other issue is the use of water. To grow all that corn takes a lot of water. When you're making methanol, you essentially have no water issues. A fourth and not trivial reason at all for going to methanol is that it's cheaper to make than gasoline, whereas ethanol costs more than gasoline. If we can put a fuel at your corner gas station that on an energy basis you can fill up with and actually pay less, I have, with no damage to your car, in fact, as I will show, perhaps some advantages to your car, I think you'll go for it. Well, some of these additional advantages include the fact that the engine, your engine, can be optimized, and has been by our EPA, optimized to run more efficiently than even a diesel engine. As you know now, if you buy a diesel, you spend several, maybe $5,000 or $7,000 more for the engine itself. You then have to pay more money for the diesel fuel. You know that diesel fuel is dirtier to use, has higher emissions, and therefore you have to pay more money for the emissions controls on the tailpipe of your car, which also are another maintenance added feature. All of this will go away if we were using 100% alcohols, that's either methanol or ethanol. But as I said, methanol is the one to go for because it doesn't compete with food and it doesn't compete with water, and it is cheaper. Another advantage in this day and age, very, very important, is the lower carbon dioxide that will be emitted from your tailpipe. In fact, if the methanol is made from biological sources like organic waste, like cow manure or even human manure, that you will be running your car, putting CO2 out, but the CO2 would have had to be used to create that vegetation, and therefore the total use of that methanol would be CO2 neutral. It is even possible to make it CO2 negative if solar energy is used to make the methanol. Lotus has gone so far as to actually produce a car called their Exigis that runs on either 100% gasoline, 100% methanol, or 100% ethanol, or any combination of those three liquid fuels. The modifications, according to them, are in a single low-cost liquid fuel system. And this demonstrator achieves emissions compliance on all three fuels. That is really, really important. And the part that we'll love as consumers is that the performance on methanol and ethanol are actually greater. They have higher performance on methanol and ethanol than they do on gasoline in that wonderful little car. A wonderful example of how this technology has been around and used for a long time comes from Sweden. Swedish diesel buses running on 95% bioethanol have been running for 15 years. 15 years. The phenomenal result of all of those years is that they have the same or better energy efficiency as they would have had if they ran on diesel fuel. In fact, they're getting, as I circled there, about 44% engine efficiency. You have to realize that your car is still running in the low 20s in terms of engine efficiency. Well, to understand what this actually could mean for a fleet's economics, outside of what it could mean for you as an individual, let's just look at this for a moment. This is from MIT, where they argue that you can reduce the engine system costs for things like those buses for $10,000 to $15,000 per vehicle. Reduce the costs. It's a combination of the engines costing less, because diesels are more expensive than spark-ignited internal combustion engines, and the fact that you don't need all that after-engine treatment. You don't need the diesel particulate filter to get rid of the smoke and the carbon, and you don't need the urea filter, which needs to get refilled often, to get rid of the NOx. This is NO and NO2, both of which are very, very strong smog-creating pollutants. This leads to two things. One is reduce maintenance for the engine and reduce maintenance for the after-engine pollution treatments. Okay. The fuel itself costs less. Methanol costs less than gasoline, and it costs significantly less than diesel fuel. And just by changing that engine so that it will run on methanol, you'll actually get 5% better fuel economy. This is really, really hard not to like. This next visual, this next slide, actually gives you some kind of an indication of how enormous our natural gas resources are. All of those red and pink areas are areas that are supplying us at the moment, or will shortly supply us with natural gas. There's an enormously larger area in the Gulf of Mexico that is currently supplying us with natural gas and could supply us with actually a lot more if we learn how to extract it. What we're looking at on solid land here is 100 to 120 year supply. And we have no doubt at all that we could get a much larger supply if we start looking at the trapped natural gas in ice off our continental shelf. That's down the road, but this is enough for a really good start and a very, very good reason to make methanol from it and run our cars. What we must not forget, however, is that methanol can also be made from wastes. We don't need to use the fossil natural gas to do this. I truly believe that we should start using that natural gas to make methanol rather than liquefy it and send it to China and Japan. That would be a national energy policy of the sort that we would not be proud of in the long run. Certainly not for our children. But what we can do, even today, is to start to make methanol from landfill gas, from all kinds of cow manure and anaerobic digestion of it, and from all kinds of human manure. All over this country, there's something like 2,700 huge landfills, every one of which basically is an anaerobic digester, and every one of which can be plumbed so that it can then be gasified and made into methanol to run our cars. That process is roughly 60% efficient. It's not bad considering that at the moment what we do is we just simply waste that resource. We have an even more exciting option if we get technologically a little bit more sophisticated, and this could be decades down the road, but it needs to be understood now because it's a real possibility. It's even a real possibility now if we could put a little bit of government funding or angel funding or industrial funding behind it. And that is to use the sun. The sun can take both carbon dioxide and methanol, and methane, the natural gas, the main component, and make methanol out of it. That solar concentrator simply has to get really hot, above about 1100 degrees, to convert the carbon dioxide that's in anaerobic digested organic waste and or in natural gas when it's taken out of wells all over the country. That has to, have to be separated out, which is a costly process. It raises the price of natural gas by a factor of the order of 5 from what it costs right at the wellhead. In any case, this process can use the CO2. It'll use the CO2, and because the sun is cooking it, the sun is making it hot, the sun will add 30% of energy to the mixture, to the initial input mixture. So what comes out is a very, very inexpensive methanol. Very, very efficient methanol process indicated there by being over 100%, 110% efficient. This is an absolutely dynamite long-term goal that we should have for the use of our organic wastes to make methanol, of course. There is an easy path for almost any municipality, county, or city in the United States to pursue the value of doing this. Let's say that over the last years, just to meet federal and state compliances, there are some E85 vehicles in your fleets. Well, let's take the older ones. They have only a certain lifetime, and they're going to be replaced. Why don't we do a test on an older E85 vehicle? Just buy methanol on the open market and establish the use of one of the GEM mixtures. 50% methanol might be a good start. Just mix it locally, a hand pump at your local fueling station. Pump it out of a 55-gallon drum if that's what it requires. No major investment. Okay, let's say it works right. What you must do then is an expanded test. Maybe 10 cars, maybe 10 vehicles. Run that test for a significant period of time, maybe a year. You get a summer in, get a winter in. Find out if this thing is working as well as it's suggested it is going to work for your specific vehicles in your specific situations. Let's say it does. Well, you then really want to expand the fleet using the GEM mixtures, the fleet of E85 vehicles that you have, and as we can guide you to, but not in this slide presentation, even ones that are not actually specifically labeled that way can be used. If you do expand the test to a majority of your vehicles or a larger fraction of your vehicles, you'll want to contract for a long-term ethanol price. In the supplementary slides here, which are not voice annotated, by the way, you'll see that the state of California managed to get methanol at about 1/3 of the open spot price. So it's possible there's negotiating room for your city or your county. What do you do then? Well, then you know that's the way you want to go. You will try to either argue politically for this thing called the Open Fuels Act, or request a waiver so that you can modify your vehicles for the order of $100. It's less. The difference is less than the cost difference in a fill-up of a large diesel vehicle. Modify your vehicles to run on a larger percentage of methanol, larger than 50. If you do that, you'll start saving immediately. You make your own renewable methanol if you have a county landfill by building the small-scale, sometimes called micro-scale, methanol facilities right there where the gas is being given off. If you do that, you will capture both the methane and the CO2 and probably emit a lot of that CO2. Still, look at the advantages to your city or county. If you get more technologically sophisticated in the future, and if the sun permits, if you have enough solar energy, you're in that part of the country that does, you'll want to go to solar gasifiers and integrate them with the ones you've already established and are working. In this case, those solar gasifiers will give you a gain of 30% in the available energy in the input that you give them, and they'll utilize all of the CO2 emitted from the landfill, and they could use the extra that's emitted by the other gasifiers. This is a real win-win. It's long-term, but it's win-win. You're now essentially CO2 neutral or negative, and you're running on your own wastes. At that point, or earlier in that process, you certainly could apply for federal production tax credits. What a bright scenario. Okay, to bring this to a quick conclusion, we want to make sure that you understand the main issues here. Transportation costs can be reduced using existing vehicles for hundreds of dollars versus tens of thousands of dollars per vehicle. Future vehicles can be even less expensive. They can be less expensive to purchase and to operate if they're operated on gasoline, ethanol, methanol mixtures. In the somewhat more distant future, methanol can be certainly contracted from farms and or purchased cheaply on long-term contracts from natural gas producers. Maintenance is traditional. It's not the complication of compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas. This is maintenance that your corner garage station should and could deal with. And you'll have flexibility in fueling. Let's just say that in the next few years, cellulosic ethanol production has a breakthrough. And now it's 50 cents a gallon. You're using waste in that. Or butanol production has a breakthrough. And now that's also 60 or 70 cents a gallon and no loss in energy density. Or flex fuel hybrids now come out, and they're a natural extension to increase the mileage of your vehicles. Those are things you will be ready to jump into because your vehicles will be prepared to use them. We wish you the best of luck in your thinking about this total picture. There are now a few supplementary slides which are not voice annotated, but which I hope by themselves can tell you a story. Thank you. Supplementary slides. A paper representing the 15-year California experience. An indication of how you can negotiate with the market price of methanol. An indication of how much CO2 you will need, you'll be putting into the atmosphere using methanol. An indication of the safety of methanol. Remember, it was used for 40 years in NASCAR racing and other race car events because it was safer for the drivers. An indication of the amount of water used to create the fuels. Note that's a log scale on the x-axis, so that using ethanol of 2,350 gallons for every 100 miles you drive can be reduced by a factor of 100 almost if you use methanol. Yes, methanol has a lower energy density than ethanol, not much, and significantly lower than diesel or gasoline. So you would need a larger gas tank. The EPA has done extensive testing on ways to make that energy density difference effectively disappear. And the way they do it is, at the moment, they're playing with hydraulic hybrids. But it's important to know that MIT has produced a study that said that you could actually reduce the engine size of your big truck, pictured here, by half. And therefore, the cost of the engine, the cost of the emissions, the amount of emissions, the cost of running it, the fuel consumption, all of that is dramatically reduced. This brake thermal efficiency plot shows you that you actually will get a larger and higher efficiency, brake thermal efficiency, if you convert a diesel engine running on diesel, to one that has spark plugs in it and is running on the methanol combination. It'll actually give you better efficiency than the dirty, big, expensive diesel engine. Now, what's very, very interesting is that you don't have to go all the way to, you can do this with methanol, which this slide shows, and you can do it with only 30% ethanol. 30% ethanol will get you a very long way towards the efficiency of a diesel engine. It's running a 38% zone there, when your car now is running in the low 30s on gasoline. You need to understand that making engines run efficiently on alcohol is a very smart idea. This slide is showing you basically that you can do this with flex fuel vehicles and get really, really good response from them. And then if you want more information, email me at robertfalco@energyresourcefulness.org. Let's work together and make this a reality. We don't need to be begging to the Arabs or anybody else for that matter.